The reason why I wanted to have John come on and speak is because he has a background in entrepreneurship. He has a background as a VC. He helped start a VC firm. And throughout that process, he's always been very focused on empowering Black and Latinx communities along the way. So we're just going to dive into his intro, and then hopefully he'll come in right at 5:15. So John Henry is a Dominican-American entrepreneur and investor. Henry has been named to the Forbes 30 Under 30, Inc. 30 Under 30, Adweek Creative 100, the Root 100, and Ebony Power 100 lists. Born and raised in New York City, John's path is a little different. He dropped out of college at the age of 18, where he picked up a job as a doorman. He went on to start and sell his first business by 21. Henry later co-founded the venture capital firm Harlem Capital, raising $40 million and making 20 investments in women and minority entrepreneurs before stepping down in 2020. Henry is also passionate about media. Henry hosted the TV show Hustle on Viceland, executive produced by Alicia Keys and Marcus Samuelson, and produced and hosted branded podcasts for brands like the Washington Post, Gimlet Media, WeWork, eBay, and Samsung. Today, Henry is the co-founder and co-CEO of Loop, an insurance company that leverages AI and data to create more fairly priced auto insurance products for all. And so the goal is to really gain knowledge from his experience and hopefully apply that here in Canada and in Montreal. So along the way, if you have any questions at all, please put them in the chat box. I'll be monitoring that. What we're gonna do is keep it really sort of interview style, and then allow for questions 15 minutes before the end. So the things that we're really going to dive in and talk about are first creating the ecosystem, which you did early on with an incubator, an accelerator program, and then the VC firm and how that happened and me going into VC. Obviously, I'm super intrigued by that. And if you have any questions about VC, really put that in the chat box. And then obviously we'll talk about his new company, Loop Insurance, which I'm really excited to hear about, and it's definitely disrupting the industry. Okay, so. Let me just, and if you have any questions about either TechAide, Café, either about Rep Matters, while we're waiting for him to come on right now, I'm more than happy to have those questions. You can unmute yourself, throw them into the chat box.
And what about Phil? About you?
What about me?
Background.
Of my background? Okay, well, so I'm new to this space. I'm excited to bring my sort of new and naive energy to this space. But really, I worked with athletes before. I worked at the University of North Carolina. I worked with the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFL, and went to China a little bit and worked with the Olympic teams. And I really helped, support athletes who I view as entrepreneurs. Right? Each of these elite athletes is an entrepreneur in their own right. And I wanted to do something that was more scalable and had more of an impact across the world. And so I looked into tech and saw that positioning myself as a VC, where I'm also supporting entrepreneurs, right, would be a pretty direct link and would match my energy and what I want to do and how I want to help. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Yes, Alan will be talking about the role of BCorps as well. definitely want to tap into that. All right, let me just make sure. And it was not ideal to have him come in at 5:15, but he has a very tight schedule, so I'm grateful for the 45 minutes he has given me.
Phil, there's something magical in what you said there about naive energy, but I don't think you're very naive.
well, thank you, Alan. That's nice of you to say. But I guess what I meant to say is my view of VC and how it can change the world. Some people, are like, oh, well, VC can't really do all that, and I kind of believe it can. So that's the naive energy I'm bringing. So I'll touch a little bit more about Rep Matters and the interview series. So put the link in the chat. And really, I sat down with people who are already in this space, are already advancing their careers as either VCs or entrepreneurs, and happened to be able to speak to the Black experience, right? They're first and foremost really incredible at what they do. And we went into very deep conversations about race, about identity, about the ecosystem. And some of them had lived and worked both in Canada and the US. And so it was really interesting to get their perspectives and hear about the differences between, let's say, the Canada and the US, and hear about how they, as Black people, navigate the space. And also, it was important to me for it to be a video interview series. I know a lot of people ask me, well, why did we release it as a podcast on Spotify? It's important to see Black people in the space. And so I really encourage you to take the time to go on the website and watch it's all YouTube videos. I will eventually be releasing it as a podcast as well. But I really wanted people to see Black people talking about tech and about venture capital. And so that's what I'm really passionate about. Has anyone seen an episode and had a question maybe about anything or anyone in Rep Matters? I'd be curious. I'm not scared of silence. I'm not scared of silence. He's on the way, by the way. He's a minute out.
Phil, I mentioned this to you already, but I think your first interview in Toronto, that notion of being underestimated was a real sort of, I think that's an amazing thing to have shone a light on.
Yeah. Janelle, she blew my mind when she said that. I hadn't really heard of it before. So the point that she'd made was that everyone talks about underrepresented founders, but really what it is underestimated, right? There's a lot of people who are in this space and who are doing incredible things, and they may not get. People may not believe that they can accomplish what they believe that they can accomplish, and over time they might just disappear from the space or persevere and do amazing things. But the idea, if you frame it as people being, not underrepresented, because yes, there's numbers to it. Black people are only 3.5% of the Canadian population. I get it, but also just making sure that we're not letting that seep into, oh, I don't see anyone who can do that, and therefore people who look like that cannot do that. So very, very important distinction there. Am I an admin on this? Hey, Laurent, can you make me a host? I don't think I'm a host right now.
Hello.
John, my man.
What's up, guys? Good to see you.
How's it going? How's it going?
Beautiful faces.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here.
100%. Great community.
Yeah. So, John, I already read your intro. I went through everything too fast. So everyone knows who you are. Fun story about John and I. He was one of the first people I reached out to when I wanted to make this transition into venture capital, and he said, interview people and build a brand around that, and that'll be your way into the space, and people who connect with you will gravitate towards you. And that couldn't have been more true. And that was like one of the most important pieces of advice that I've ever gotten. So instead of applying to a million jobs, I lived it through passion and you really was able to make a footing for myself in the space. So thank you for that, John.
100%. Wow. Look at this execution. That's amazing. I was like, go build community around, a core principle. And that is how you build movement. And that's more powerful than a fancy resume. And it's really great to now be in the microcosm of all the wonderful things that you've and the community have executed on. So kudos.
Appreciate that. So I want to dive right into the meat of it.
100%.
Really?
Can you, are you recording on speaker view versus gallery? Just a technical thing.
Whoever's recording, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay. Well, we'll just throw that out there in the ethos. It'll help us recreate a ton of really great content in a really usable format down the stretch. But yeah,
if it's in gallery or if it's in speaker
if it's in
view.
speaker, that way, whoever's speaking is like real present versus the grid.
Oh, that would be great.
Yep.
Good fight. You are the content guy, so I'm gonna follow whatever you say content wise. Yeah. So I've already painted the picture of you know, how you went from your first exit to Cofound Harlem to Harlem Capital and so on. So what made you want to give back right after your first exit? Because you had you know, you sold your first business, and then right away you quickly you stepped into Cofound Harlem. What made you want to do that as opposed to going and creating another big business?
Yeah, I didn't see it as giving back, to be honest. I saw it as continuing. I saw it as expanding my work and my sense of what I thought was possible for myself. So, you know, my very first business was, you know, a very brass tacks. It was a laundromat. You know, I say on-demand dry cleaner now because that shit sounds way fancier, makes me look way cooler. It was me knocking on your door and grabbing your sack of laundry, and I had no car, so I had to take the subway, take the A train all the way down Harlem, take the L train into Bushwick, drop it off, take that route all the way back home, and then the next day take that route all the way back, grab the garment and deliver it and make $17 gross. So I netted $8. You tell me why I did that. I have no clue, but I just really believe in executing on what is capturing your imagination. And I didn't, if I took it for face value, I might say, wow, I'm drawn to, you know, clean people's dirty underwear. That seems bizarre. There's always something there. It might not be the full thing of what you're drawn to, but there's a kernel somewhere in there. And through experience, you begin to discern and distinguish what you love from what you don't. And so what I learned that I love from building this dry cleaner was business and but also starting to nurture a bit of community because I was in Harlem. And so after that go around at Mobile City Services, if you could believe that was the name, Jesus, not was my first rodeo at brand, but I have long since been driven to projects based on, again, what is capturing my imagination. At the time, we were going to events in the New York City tech ecosystem. Most of them happened downtown. So we would go to them and have all this great dialogue. And then it occurred to me that I would see most of not participants, but like the people that were in the crowd would ride the train back with me uptown. And so I realized, like, wow, the majority of the attendees were coming from uptown, but we weren't having the conversations uptown. So we needed to go downtown by necessity. And so it really was a opportunity to nurture community uptown. And so anyway, all that to say, it is commonly phrased as, hey, what made you want to give back? But it really was me executing against what I felt was a need in the community. And that started really my first foray with brand building. I would say Mobile City was more sales focused, and I would say Cofound Harlem was more community and brand focused, which still lives in my work today.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. I'd never heard you say it like that, because it looks like more of a geographic focus as opposed to like a racial focus, where it was like, oh, I want to put Black and Latinx entrepreneurs on. It was just kind of like, hey, I want people uptown to be able to have access to the same things that we're seeing downtown. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. It was geographic, and I really do believe in wherever possible, whenever it makes sense, to incorporate your geography into your story. It's not always applicable, but in the instances in which it is, I think it can serve as like as an element of distinguishability, right? There were a lot of incubators in and around New York, but us being in Harlem really stood out, and we wore that proudly and we worked it into the story. And, you know, it's also a very astute observation that you just made, that there definitely was this evolution from, it was a geographic focus in a culturally Black and historically rich neighborhood, but it had nothing to do with race at first. And it was through the work actually that I became more aware of, you know, a lot of the, you know, inequities that I had internalized as a kid and just took for granted, and then became more aware of it. There was one specific time when I sat down with one of the councilmen of Harlem at a cafe, and he was like, look, John, I think what you're doing is cool. You're bringing tech uptown. He's like, I don't know how else to say this, but how can we make sure that the work benefits Raheem as much as it does Brandon? And I got it in that moment. I started understanding that if you're going to build community, particularly in a neighborhood that is culturally you know, rich and Black and ethnic and diverse, then you have to make sure that your programming is not just, you know, I had a tendency to just over index for like, yo, tech, new, you know, whatever. And I started realizing that wasn't as inclusive. Of course, this was in 2013, so it was a lot earlier. But anyway, my work around being more intentional about inclusiveness started, I would say, way back when at Cofound.
Amazing, amazing. So if you were to do that again in today's climate, in today's environment, are there things that you would add to the sort of points that you were making about, hey, you know, we need this geographically, we need this. Are there any things that you would change in your approach to creating a sort of incubator specifically for the reasons that you did?
I wouldn't change much, but I would emphasize certain elements. One of them, which is not possible at the moment in a lot of ways, is offline. It's not super scalable, but the depth that you can achieve with small offline, in-person activations, meetings, whatever you want to call them, is so powerful. And I firmly believe that the glue of my now larger digital presence stems all the way back to, we used to have this conversation series called War Stories. And it was my first, you know, rodeo. And I'd be like, hey guys, welcome to War Stories. And I was super animated. And it was like 20 of us in a little room. And we would have those every other Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. And like that in depth, like a lot of those relationships, a lot of like, you fine tune your ability to resonate. So a lot of like what you can do in an amplified fashion has to be refined in person. And so I really, really firmly believe in the power of in-person, offline, smaller setting types of scenarios. And the 2021 version of that is this, actually.
Exactly.
This is it, right?
Yeah.
This isn't a megacon and it's not a one-on-one, it's a pod. And there's a lot of value to building in a pod. You guys get to know one another. You experience the same conversations at the same moment in time. And a lot of the elements that, you know, I think I found valuable in those early days, I think. So I would stress that. And then the other thing I would stress is mission, man. Mission is going to unlock doors that profit cannot. And I have my idea for my first book. It's funny, I had a book deal before I had a book idea, and then I let the deal go because I didn't know, like my agent was pressuring me like, yo, you got to say something. I was like, I don't know what to say. I didn't want to do like a memoir because that felt like really like story of my life. And I'm 28. It just felt weird. But now I know what it is. And that book is called The Mission Economy. And I firmly, deeply believe that we are living in a mission economy whereby us as consumers and as a culture demand more from the services that we back, from the companies that we support, from our grocery stores, really all across the value chain. We demand more. We expect more. And leading with mission allows you to unlock resonance, which unlocks distribution, which unlocks community, which unlocks ultimately profit, although that shouldn't be the measure. But those are the two things that I would double click on as super valuable to grow community.
That's just amazing. That really resonates with me. I think that at least I was told from a young age, you can either do good or make money, right? If you do good, you're broke. And if you make money, you're not doing good, right? That's the sort of concept that a lot of people are ingrained with. And that really resonates with me because you're fusing both. You're saying, hey, I can do good and eventually make money.
100%. And like, if, you know, my business now is called Loop, and we are taking the same mission-driven work and bringing it to financial services in an industry that otherwise might be considered boring. But if you think about it, is absolutely required. You need to be insured to do just about anything, get a loan, get a car, whatever. We're in auto. But there are a lot of elements within insurance that perpetuate structural bias 100%. The fact that your price is predetermined based on your credit is structurally biased and affects communities of color and low-income people 100%. The fact that you get a discount if you're Ivy League is preposterous to me. Like if you went to Harvard, you get a 5% discount. Like,
Yeah.
that's preposterous.
Yeah.
If you have a white collar job, you get a discount. The way that the rate filing, which is like, your rates in insurance are regulated. So you can't just like do a 5% discount if your sweater is not selling, like you can in e-com. Like rates are baked in, they're approved, and they're like locked. So all of the elements of pricing have to be approved and vetted. And when you take a really close look, a lot of those things are just proxies for risk. But what they've actually ended up doing was really unfairly penalizing a lot of communities of color, a lot of young people, a lot of different life paths, so much so that you're lumped into a bucket that's called non-standard. And when I heard that, I was like, what does that mean? Non-standard, and they would say, oh, it means urban, and so
what does urban mean?
The same implicit like bias that exists in venture, which is, in banking is like insurance's older cousin, exists in insurance. And all that to say, so I digress a little bit, but it was just to illustrate the point that there is a lot of profit and a big business to build around serving customers more equitably. We are going to build a more inclusive insurance product, and we're going to build in their blind spot. And the same people that they overlook, that they overprice, and that they underinsure, and they don't feel super great at these carriers because they're seen as non-standard, we're going to make you feel like a VIP. We're going to love you. We're going to create a product that's incredibly considerate of your life experience. And that's another example of doing well and doing good at the same time. And
it totally is.
We're a few $1 billion and they try to acquire us, like it'll be too late for them.
Too late. So I have a whole set of questions for Loop, and that was one of them. So you knocked one off. But before getting to that, I want to talk a little bit about the Harlem Capital and about creating that and starting that. So my first question is, do billionaires actually care about racial equity?
Great question. I'm not going to paint them all with a broad brush. I think some couldn't give two shits. I think many of what we found was in the fundraising trail was that millionaires looked for every reason why something couldn't work still. Deca millionaires were more open to possibility, but still not quite there. Centi millionaires, okay, could go either way. Billionaires almost always only see the reasons why something can work. Because they have so much infrastructure around them that they're banking on that if they got to you, if the opportunity made its way all the way through your system and got to your desk and you're sitting down face to face, that you were good enough to get through the ranks. So, okay, let me perceive this with an open mind. And it wasn't until Henry Kravis and George Roberts, or I think it was just Henry. Yeah, it was just Henry Kravis. Was George Roberts there? I don't remember. The co-founders of KKR, when we first pitched them, they were like, yeah, this is awesome. And one of the things that we were really nervous about was that my business partners were in business school, and everyone else was like, oh, wow, you're in business school. How are you going to manage the two? And when we said it almost underneath our breath, like, yeah, and we're and our parents. And he was like, wow, what an ambitious side hustle. I love it. And it was just like a moment when we realized that like billionaires got there, especially if you're self-made. The legacy billionaires, I don't know, but the self-made billionaires that achieve this wealth in one lifetime will almost always look for reasons why things work. It's why they got there, full of possibility, see the potential in so many life paths. And I have a large enough sample set of personal experience with self-made billionaires from the fundraising trail that I can say that I feel like the whole 99 and 1% thing unfairly characterizes people that are self-made as like, they demonize them. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case.
That's super interesting. And so while you were on the fundraising trail, while you were pitching, were there any major tweaks that you had to make to, your value proposition or whatever the case is? Because usually it's either one of two things, right? Diversity equals profits, or it's the right thing to do. And was there a third option that you went with? And did you pivot from one to another?
Wow. Excellent questions all around. I would say One thing that we did do a lot was a lot of pitch practice. We went live to the market with version 107 of our deck. We like literally refine. And before we went and had our first really big pitch, which was Mr. Kravis, we anticipated every question that every naysayer had ever asked us, and not only worked through what the responses would be, and if it was a weak response, write it down and say, okay, we need something stronger here. Okay, are there any industries that you guys focus on? You know, we were a little self-conscious about being generalists at the time, and then we ended up determining that, okay, 70% of seed stage funds in the US are generalists, so we're actually in line with market, and we're going to have affinities for these markets, but you know, we're diversity first. As an example of like, that was an answer that we cooked up with a lot of thought, that when you're fundraising, you'll see any one thing can leave you kind of dead in the water. And if you're really unlucky, it happens early in the pitch where you get that one question that like you just don't have that good answer for. Every pitch, every business has that one Achilles heel. And in a lot of cases, you have numerous of them. If you get asked that Achilles heel question early, you're dead in the water. This meeting was so important to us that we anticipated and guarded for it and had a number of canned responses. And then we went so far as to say, okay, if we get asked this question, this partner specifically will answer it. John did anything related to market, branding, reaching, so on. Fund model was Henri, you know, so on and so forth. So those are some of the preparatory things that we did. But with respects to pivot, I think we ended up selling short the power of the mission and the brand and the diversity in the whole fundraising, fundraising trail for Fund One. I think what we learned was that the power of brand is actually not some super fluffy thing that can't be quantified. Like, we learned that in order to win, you must build brand. And not only that, you have to build a category dominant brand. You have to build a brand. We set out to build a brand that anytime any woman or any person of color anywhere in the US said that they were going to raise a round, 5 people were beating them over the head and saying, yo, have you heard of Harlem Capital?
Yep.
That's how you win. So I would say the big pivot strategically at a high level was taking this thing that we knew was our superpower, but we're afraid to admit it, and leaning all the way in and saying we're building the most premier diversity brand. And that is going to be the reason we win on deals, on competitive deals. That's going to be the reason we win on talent. And that's going to be the reason we attract mission aligned LPs. We could not have foreseen the George Floyd events, which had a massive influx of capital follow. And what happened? We were ahead of the market. And now that influx of capital was looking for homes, and the natural home for capital that's yet unparked is vehicles that have outsized brand. And so it's no coincidence that Harlem Capital was able to win $10 million from Apple, huge investment.
Yep. Recently, yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Another 10Ms from Bank of America. So on and so forth. They're going to announce their fund too. I won't, announce it for them, but they were able to execute on that because we emphasized brand and infrastructure and really leaned into it.
That's super interesting. So I'd gone 1 and 2 and maybe 3, and you just said like, okay, no, we're not looking at that. It's all about brand. Completely shifted the paradigm for me.
So just like before we move on from that, how many venture funds are there? A lot. There were so many venture funds sprouting up all the time. Cool little cute names, cute little websites, cute little mission statements. How many do you know?
Yep.
You got to build brand. And that was the thing that we had, like, especially in the diversity space. Yeah, I'll leave it there. But like brand infrastructure makes it serves almost as a natural amplification and extension of your natural efforts. People will want to come intern for you for free because they're banging on the door. They just got to be a part of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Deal flow, entrepreneurs, investors, and so on. So I really just believe in the power of it.
Amazing. And so part of what you're selling within that brand, right, was like Black excellence, right? At least from the outside, right? It was like, wow, this group of Black guys came together and created this VC fund, raised tens of millions of dollars. How do you sort of do that without sort of veering towards elitism, where it's like, to be in this space, you have to be the best of the best?
Yet to be seen.
You know,
Yet to be seen. I think that we talked about this privately. Within diversity, with diversity investing, one of the things that can happen naturally is you look for candidates of color that most closely fit the mold.
Yeah.
I.e., and I'm just keeping it a buck, right? Like, i.e., you find people that have the Ivy League credential, the institutions, the ex-Facebook, ex-Google, and then they happen to be of color.
Mm-hmm.
That makes, if you look at it, things like a funnel, those folks are towards the bottom of the funnel, right? In that they're easy bets.
Yeah, and they're probably going to make it anyways.
They're probably going to make it anyways. But
yeah.
they're not any less deserving of diversity capital than someone who's earlier in the funnel. Sure. It's just, we have to be careful as a whole, the whole diversity and VC movement, to not super over index for that group of diversity for too long. Now, there is an argument to be made that in order for diversity diversity in VC as an asset class to grow, you got to go and crush it. And picking people that are primed and already working on VC backable things and already exposed to that environment and already have the tools and the network to kind of crush it makes the most viable sense to like deploy capital into for right now. Yeah. You got to pick your battles. And then in fund 2, you can expand and continually expand. So I do think that is what's going on, but I do think that there is opportunity in venture to apply a little bit of a different lens of what diversity looks like. You know, it's not just of color from, you know, a validated, institutionally speaking, life path. It's, I want you to go find diamonds in the rough from immigrant households and life paths and lower income settings and traditionally blue collar settings. But of course, that's more ambitious and difficult to do at first. So you got to start somewhere, and that's where I think the space is right now. Yeah. And shout out to Arlen Hamilton. I think Arlen Hamilton is an incredible picker, and just picks
big shout out.
Just picks from anywhere and like finds good deals.
Backstage Capital, big shout out to them. Let's shift towards Loop. I want to talk a little bit about Loop, because you answered my initial question, which was, you know, what's wrong with the car insurance industry from a social demographic perspective. So you already kind of like nailed that. I guess, how is Loop changing that would be the follow-up to that.
Yeah. I think the most meaningful thing that we're doing are removing factors within the what is considered like the norm within insurance. We're removing them all together. But actuarially, which is like, you know, the actuaries is like math justification in insurance. You can't just remove these key elements and be like, ta-da. Yeah. You know, like you have to replace them because it's a regulated field. And so you have to prove to regulators that your method is substantiated mathematically. And so the way that we're doing that is we're banking on that the thing that matters most to your price in your car insurance is how you drive and where you drive. So we're a mobile only product. You download Loop. We are on the journey with you. And we're able to develop a much more equitable price for you because we're not taking into account your education, income, occupation, credit score, marital status. Like, you get dinged if you're a widow.
That's crazy. That's absolutely ridiculous.
The way that let me just give you guys a concrete example. If you are upper middle class and graduated from a 4-year school, but have a DUI and several speeding infractions, you still get a better rate than someone who's lower income with a clean driving record.
Really?
Like, is that not America in a nutshell? Like, if you're privileged but have been reckless, you get significantly better treatment still than someone who comes from a much more difficult life path, who's behaved cleaner, but just like the way the cards stacked up in society, like they're deemed as risky because they live in a poorer neighborhood.
Wow.
So that inefficiency in pricing as a result of using models that over-index for demographic factors is what we're doing away with. So that's all the innovation and shit on the back end. But on the front end, it's a big-hearted brand that loves you and is social first and creates a ton of content and does like, you know, if your city drives safely, then like we're going to buy you a cup of coffee from the local cafe so that we can support small business. Like insurance is a really unique position because we collect revenues up front. It's a regressive tax in that way. You pay for your premium up front. And then if something happens, we pay out. But what if less things happen than we anticipated? We have a net. What do you do with that net? Well, you can distribute it back to shareholders, or you can distribute it back to the community.
So talking about that, one of my questions was, you are a B Corp. Can you elaborate on what that means and what that structure is, legally speaking?
Sure. B Corp means that you're a public benefit corporation, which means a regular C Corp has a fiduciary responsibility only to your shareholders. So for example, if you're drilling oil and it's more profitable for you to do so, even though it's harmful to the environment, you're legally okay to do so because your legal responsibility is to maximize profits for your shareholders. In a public benefit corp, you have a stated social mission, whereby our mission is to create more fairly priced insurance products using alternate data methods. And so when faced with the decision to maximize profits, if it comes at the expense of community, we can be sued for that. We opened ourselves up for legal risk as a way to put our money where the mouth is at and say, we're a public benefit corporation. 100% of our employees, from call center to the custodial staff to the C-suite, own equity in Loop. And we're going to push the bound even further and allow each and every one of our customers to buy equity in Loop.
Really?
We want to meaningfully support the same communities that we insure. And by the way, that I learned from Cofound, right? So when we're tying it back here, because at Cofound Harlem, we took no equity. We backed you 9 months, all this stuff, and all you had to do was stay in Harlem, and it made people go, really? Just did? So I learned that when you're working on something, if you can introduce a shock element like that, like it's one thing to say, yo, all of our employees get equity. Okay, cool. When you say, yo, all of our customers can buy, I'm going to dilute my own ownership in this business because I want the community to partake, because you typically don't get access until you IPO. And by that point, it's too late. I want the entire community as a whole to benefit from the ride up. Things like that create shock factor and that are genuinely rooted in good, I think is the way to build movement, which ties back to the mission economy.
That's amazing. Thank you for elaborating on that. So how much do you feel yourself intentionally focusing on building a diverse team, right? Your brand is about, diversity already. So does that automatically attract diverse talent, or do you feel like you still need to be very intentional about how you create your team?
Great question. Still need to be intentional because diversity applies in so many different ways. So for example, we're a very diverse team by the numbers. We're overwhelmingly ethnic, have healthy, like 50-50 women, men representation. But then within our teams, we started noticing some homogenous situations going on. Like it turns out that a lot of my followers, because I'm a Dominican male, are Dominican men. And like my marketing team is like purely Dominican men. And I was like, okay, so we're diverse when you look at us top down. But like within my team, I can't have everyone be a Dominican guy or a guy. And so that was a moment in which we were intentional about saying our next hire must be a woman. And it was a community manager. So it's a very key role, is public facing. Another example is within our data team was overwhelmingly Asian. And again, that's diverse, but it's really important for us to diversify the life experiences that are crafting the predictive models, right? That's the algorithm development. We need diversity of thought in the input of these models. Another example is our insurance ops team skews white. And that's because a lot of the talent pool in insurance is white. But like, that's where the racist shit has traditionally been, right? Like in the insurance ops side. So like that, we need more people of color there. And so on and so forth. So I think that by and large, we're passing with flying colors on the diversity spectrum, but there's a lot more. Sorry if I'm breaking up, my Wi-Fi is only all right here, but what I was saying was like, by and large, we passed the diversity sniff test, but like we're pushing that bound now and saying, can we get variety and diversity cross team so that we can have a more well-rounded output in product from technical perspective, data model perspective, insurance perspective, and engineering perspective.
Well, the level of intentionality between even the segments, the inside your company, that's really crazy. Really, and cool to see that even like you don't just assume that your company is going to be diverse in the right ways just because you're diverse and because your co-CEO is a woman or whatever. Like it doesn't mean that automatically the team. You still need intentionality behind that, and that's awesome to see. So I know I saw someone ask you this question. Nick asked you this question on Instagram, but I'm curious, who do you model yourself after? Who do you look up to? Who are you trying to be? You've had some time to think about it.
I think back to that Matthew McConaughey. I don't know if you guys ever seen that speech.
I think about it all the time. Go ahead.
Like, yo, every time I'm asked, he's like, he never had a good answer, and he realized he was chasing his future self in 10 years. Yeah. That's kind of my answer, but I draw inspiration from everywhere is the truth. Mm-hmm. But I don't I'm not modeling myself after anyone. I'm just trying to be the best. That's like, so Mr. Universe, trying to be the best version of me I can be. But what I do is I try to draw from anytime. This lesson I learned from jazz, like when you hear a phrase in jazz that you resonate with, that's a clue about you. You can play the same solo and all different musicians will resonate with a different phrase within that same solo. And so what I look for are people in the world abroad that have traits that I like about them, right? So for example, my former partner at Harlem Capital, Henri, he has so many traits that I respect and admire and adore about him. For example, he has a very trusting leadership, which I had never really practically been in the presence of, whereby I have an intense energy, but I'll like get you to work because I'm just like busting ass. And I'm like, hey, you're getting it done. He had this like, yo, you got it. And it was like, just seeing that, I worked that into my game now. And I lead that way at Loop because I really liked that. I draw a lot of inspiration from my peers, to be honest. A lot of people on the ground that we're building with now, I'm less interested in who built what 20 years ago. I'm more interested in who are building things now and what can I learn from them and work into my game. So that's what I'm constantly thinking through. And like LeBron, I like to try to work on the off season, and, they would guard him from the perimeter because they knew he didn't have a 3-ball. Next season, he had the ill 3-ball. Yep. then he became a real problem. Right. Yep. And so like, can you every year work a new skill into your game and become a more and more complete player? That's what I'm looking to do as an entrepreneur.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's just amazing. And I've been seeing you create a lot of content about being a trusting leader. And again, that resonates with me. So thanks for highlighting that. What I want to do now is just open up to some questions. If anyone who's been watching has some questions, please put them into the main chat, or really just unmute yourself. We'll open a conversation. We're a small and tight-knit group here. Would love to have some questions from someone other than myself. Anyone? I still have more questions.
I'll go with one, Phil.
There we go, John.
Hey, hi, John. Great to have you. Thanks so much. Thank you, Phil. Coming back to your fundraising and this idea of, you said perhaps you hadn't gone strongly enough with the mission or the purpose. I think this is what you were suggesting initially. What was it that sort of held you back from going full throttle?
It's a great question. What held us back was it not being immediate in the context of a very, it's a financial, it's the finance industry. So it's like in a world where people make investment decisions purely based on ROI and MOIC and IRR, how do you then say, and brand, it's like, it's a fluffy thing. And then even moreover, like diversity was seen as a fluffy category at the time. It has matured, surely. But we had to really make a business case for diversity. And we actually, to zoom into that comment that I made that you're now asking about, the actual concrete way that we deviated from emphasizing brand was because we were in a very numbers driven field. We sought to make a quantified argument to prove numerically that diversity was a business case. Oh, well, $134 billion was invested into VC as a whole in 2019. 3-4% are going to these. Therefore, there's a lot of arbitrage here. The average valuation of a woman or founder of color in the seed stage was $6 to $8 million, but the average valuation at the A was a $27 to $32.5 million. We're banking on that if we're able to funnel X amount of talent from this diverse deal flow and siphon them over to tier 1 VCs for the A, we can make an average of a 4 to 8x pop valuation wise unrealized returns by the A track. And therefore we're not needing 100x wins to win, because we get in at such a modest valuation, we only need but so many outcomes in order to return the fund. You see what I mean?
So I'm going to introduce it, and then maybe Phil, you would like to take it. Well, maybe Phil, you're probably going to say the same thing about narrative and data.
So John Stokes is the first VC I ever met. He's my mentor, and he's who I built Rep Matters with. And we have conversations around this stuff all the time. And he's laughing right now because I said, I really dug in and said, we need more numbers. And he's like, Phil, it's all about narrative. It's all about being mission driven. And so he's smirking because you're agreeing with him. Having already raised, a $40 million fund.
Well, but hear me out though. You got to know your shit cold.
Mm-hmm.
Cold. If I catch you slipping on any number, you're done.
Yeah.
You're done. I made the mistake early on when a potential LP, before we officially opened our raise, said, hey, let's meet for lunch. I didn't know my numbers then. And she had asked me a few things cold, like, oh, what's your fund strategy? Like, how much are you deploying, for initial investment? How much are you reserving for follow-on? What's your target ownership percentage? Like all the stuff that I know cold now, but flopped then. And I was like, oh, I thought this was a lunch. I thought this was a casual lunch. No such thing. Every conversation when you're fundraising will turn into a potential LP dance. So you got to know your numbers cold. And that's the nuance that I feel like is worth highlighting is it's not, hey, I over-index on mission. I don't know my numbers. It's I know my numbers fucking cold. I lead with mission because that's when you get emotional response. And any prodding, I can back it all up quantifiably. See what I'm saying?
Amazing. And just to wrap it up, so there's a question just about why you went from the VC side of the table back to the founder side.
Oh, because I'm not a fund manager, man. Who was I kidding? I ain't no fund manager, man. I mean, I look good in a suit and tie. I like putting it on. But when it came to like the day-to-day of the practical reality of being a fund manager, I had to be honest with myself. I had to have a very powerful self-reflection moment where I realized I worked 4 to 5 years to get to this very point. Why jump off right when you're almost guaranteed to get rich, because you're making 2% of the total fund size and asset management fee for 10 years. And that's just fund one. Fund one's a loss leader. You deploy a fund within 2 years, you're raising fund two within a year and a half of fund one. At some point, you're collecting fees from $100 million fund two, or whatever size you get. You're getting 2% of that fund and 2% of fund one, right? Both of those have 10-year lifespans. By the time you raise fund three, we did the math, and like there's like a 1 year window where you're getting 3 set of asset management fees from 3 different funds. You get rich. The mentioned by the time you're collecting real fat fees, your bets from fund one are starting to mature, and that's when you start getting rich, right? So
John's like, no, John Stokes is shaking his head.
It takes longer than that.
Okay, it takes even longer than that. Okay, fine.
He's on fund 4 or 5 or something, or maybe more. But
Got you. Okay, so then playing out that trajectory, I was like, damn, do I feel like I'm good enough to go out there and create a vehicle that can drive just as much value? Even like when you're on a rocket ship, you're on like Harlem Capital is a rocket ship. Right team, right time, right place, right execution, 100%. Did my self-awareness of the fact that this was not a great fit for me for the next 10 years, should that trump the scariness that comes with like, am I going to be able to repeat this rocket ship dynamic? For me, it was worth just leaving this very, very competent team in the hands of this very, very beautiful and deserving mission, and saying, wow, I have my DNA in this. It's going to go and do something great. I believe that I have more to contribute to the world. And now I have more tools, more resources, more access to network, more capacity, more acumen. And I trust that I'll be able to land in a role that will more fully express like my desire to serve the community. And I have found that, and I do believe that Loop is a rocket ship, and I firmly believe that we will go all the way to IPO. And so sometimes you got to let things go in order to kind of have what's coming up next for you.
That's amazing. The confidence to step away from a rocket, though, I respect it to the utmost. Look, I want to be respectful of your time and of everyone's time. John, I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us. Thank you for TechAide Café for having us. And go check out Rep Matters. Would love for everyone to look at the interviews and watch those. And maybe I'll get John on one of those eventually. Thank you,
100%,
brother.
man. Thank you. I really enjoy this platform. It's a really special community. This has been one of my favorite conversations that I've had as of late. So thank you all for having me and gracing me with your ear. I would 100% appreciate and support if you guys could go over to loopinsure.co.
I actually lined it up and was going to put it in the chat box.
Oh, dang. Loop Insure. I put a space in there. There you go. That's the website. Go support, join the wait list, tell a friend. We are looking to make, to build a more inclusive future of insurance, starting in auto and going who knows where. But yeah, thank you guys again. And I look forward to seeing this content. We're going to chop it up. We're going to make a lot of fun stuff. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Many thanks, John and Phil. That was fantastic.
Cheers.
All the best.
Bye-bye.